So here's the deal. My name's Tom. A few years back, I was working security at this obscure government facility. Now, I can't tell you where it was because they'd take us there in these buses with super dark windows. At first, it seemed like a standard gig. But as time went by, I started noticing odd things. The facility got supplies delivered at weird hours, always by the same unmarked truck. I thought it was strange, but I'm a by-the-book kind of guy, so I kept my head down. One evening, though, things changed. I was on night shift, and the same old truck rolled in. But this time, something was off. The usual driver wasn't there, and this new guy, he was acting nervous. That's when I saw them unload this huge, box-like thing from the truck. It was covered in tarp, but it was humming in a way that didn't sound like any machine I'd ever heard before. I wasn't sure what to make of it. But, sometimes when something doesn't feel right, it just isn't. You know what I mean? Now, this humming thing, it didn't leave my mind. But there wasn't much I could do except continue my rounds and keep an eye out. After all, I was there to protect the place, not snoop around. But the weird stuff, it just kept happening. A few days later, some guys in lab coats came in. They weren't regulars and seemed pretty hush-hush. They went straight to the area where they'd stored the humming box. Now, I'm not a curious man by nature, but something about this whole situation started to bug me. One night, while doing my rounds, I happened to walk by the storage area. The door, usually locked tight, was slightly ajar. The humming was louder, and I could swear I heard voices arguing from inside. That's when my gut really started to yell at me. It said, "Tom, something's off. Something's way off." So there I was, standing in front of this slightly ajar door, the strange humming sound seeping out, and whispers of an argument getting louder. I figured it was now or never, right? I took a deep breath, pushed the door open a little, and peeked in. Inside, I could see the big box thing, but now it was uncovered. It was like no piece of machinery I'd ever seen before. It was sleek and metallic with a lot of blinking lights and wires all around. And standing around it, the lab coat guys, engaged in what looked like a heated debate. I couldn't catch everything they said, but I picked up enough. Words like energy source, unstable, and potential disaster were being thrown around. Now, I'm no scientist, but I knew enough to understand that whatever this thing was, it wasn't standard issue. Just then, one of them noticed the door. I ducked out of sight, my heart pounding. I knew I was in deep. This wasn't just some routine job anymore. I was in the middle of something big, and I had no idea what to do next. That night, I barely slept a wink. All I could think about was that weird box, the heated argument, and the undeniable sense that something was really wrong. When I got back to work, I was on edge wondering if they knew someone had been eavesdropping. Days turned into weeks, and that humming box thing became a part of the background noise. But the tension, it never eased. You could feel it, like a thunderstorm waiting to break. Then one night, it happened. The power in the entire facility went out. I mean, pitch black, not even the emergency lights. The only sound was the now deafening hum of the box. Then the ground started shaking and alarms started blaring. This was it, the potential disaster the lab guys had been talking about. I grabbed my flashlight and raced towards the storage area. The door was wide open and inside chaos. The lab guys were scrambling, trying to do something to the box, but I could see it. It was glowing, the humming now an ear-splitting roar. All I could think was, I have to get out. Just as I turned to leave, there was a brilliant flash of light. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, the taste of metal in my mouth. My head was pounding and my ears were ringing, but apart from a few scratches, I was okay. I stumbled to my feet, grabbing my dropped flashlight. The room was in ruins. The box, or whatever it had been, was just a charred, twisted piece of metal. And the lab guys, they were sprawled out around the room, unconscious, or worse. I checked on them. They were alive but knocked out cold. I tried to radio for help, but it was dead. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started dragging them out one by one. By the time the backup power kicked in and the cavalry arrived, I had managed to get them all out. The official story, an experimental power source had malfunctioned. Me, I was hailed as a hero for saving the scientists. But you know what the kicker is. After that night, I never saw that truck or the lab guys again. I still don't know what that box was or what it was doing there. But I do know one thing, sometimes it's better not knowing the whole truth. As long as I live, I'll never forget the sight of that humming box. The flash of light and the feeling that I had brushed with something beyond my understanding. So, it was a regular night shift for us. You know, the Texas border. As dry as a bone and as quiet as a church mouse. I've been working the line for a decade, and let me tell ya, it wasn't my first rodeo with the odd and unexpected. But that night, man, it was something else. So, we had been getting these weird reports, right? Strange sightings missing livestock, trails that ended as abruptly as they began. People were talking about some large figure stalking in the shadows. To be honest, I chalked it up to too many campfire stories and a dash of heat stroke. But then, things started getting weirder. One evening, we're out on patrol, doing the usual rounds. Suddenly, Scott, one of the rookies, gives a shout. He's pointing at this large figure at the edge of our lights. My heart's hammering because this thing, it's big and it's not human. We've all heard the stories about werewolves, right? Half man, half wolf coming out during the full moon. You'd think it's all baloney, but standing there, staring at this massive, hulking figure, I couldn't help but think about those tales. This thing, it looked just like that. A dog and human hybrid straight out of some horror flick. I can't begin to tell you how terrifying it was. Its eyes glowed in the dark like two burning embers, and its teeth, man, they were sharper than a razor. We started digging after that, digging for answers. But every rock we turned, it felt like the government was right there, turning it back, cover-ups, bigger than anything I've seen in my time. I wish I could tell you more. I wish I could say it was just another wild animal or some weird trick of the light. But this thing, it's real. As real as you and me, it's out there, and the higher-ups don't want people to know. All I can do now is to protect my guys and keep doing my job. But man, it's not the same after you've looked into the eyes of something that ain't supposed to exist. You never forget that. You never do. I would prefer if you left my identity anonymous. I'm not looking for any notoriety, clout, or fame for me submitting the story to you, so I would really prefer it to stay that way. Alright, so here's what happened. I was riding along with my horses last week at about 8 p.m. I noticed a bright flickering light that was unusual, off in the distance. The horses kept getting spooked, so we walked closer to the area where we saw it to investigate. I realized it looked like a man carrying a lantern, walking slowly across the field towards some trees at an angle across from me, slightly in front of me. This thing or being or whatever it was looked very strange. I didn't quite understand what I was seeing. Then, out of the forest where this ghastly figure disappeared, was this strange canine-looking animal. It was very tall and appeared to have red, amber glowing eyes, pointed ears, long hair down to its back, midway along its tail, with what appeared to be a large mane just staring off in our direction. I was in such shock. I tried to get my horses to go forward, but they would not. They were rearing up on their hind legs, acting very afraid. I got off my horse and approached this creature with my weapon about to be drawn, but it quickly retracted itself back into the trees as if it was waiting for me. I ran into the woods after it. I could hear it running through the brush and climbing trees to get away from me. I followed it and further for about 15 minutes until I came upon a large open area with many trees. I knew this thing was hiding up in there, just waiting to pounce. This thing was toying with me, and I knew it. I turned around and left the area the same way I came in. I could feel this thing following me like it wasn't done with me. It wanted to do things on its own terms. Even though I could feel its heavy presence lingering in the area, I left. I was afraid it was going to hurt my horses. Whatever this thing was, I was in the woods for a couple of days afterwards tracking this thing. I figured out that it kills its prey and drags them back into its den or burrow. There have been many dead game animals and possibly some missing persons. I'm sure of it. This has not been the first time this has happened either. One of the days while I was tracking this very strange animal, I found a large dugout in the earth that I believe was the den of this thing. It stunk like wet dog and rotting meat and urine very badly. I nearly vomited. At the edge, there was a strange-looking severed hand and feet lying in a pile. I couldn't tell if it was human or not. It was pretty badly decayed. I know for sure that this thing is killing people around here. Who knows if they're hunting or hiking? It's bold enough to kill right out in the open, apparently. Among the pile of carcasses were also bones littered about and that god-awful stench. I have no way to prove this was actually the den of this animal, but I can only speculate. On the way back, I would hear strange noises, growling and rustling in the woods all around. The woods would get real quiet, and I'd get this strange sensation that was crawling up my spine, like something was about to happen. I knew I was being watched the entire time I'd be out walking around, just walking back to my house. Then, last night, I was out there tracking this creature again, and I heard something scream off in the distance, yelling several times. It seemed to be coming from the direction of my house, but it wasn't quite clear. I looked around but didn't see anything in the dark. No campfires or flashlights that could have possibly indicated somebody being out here. I mentioned this to some friends and family that live nearby. They've heard similar things happening at night while being out here, whether they're hiking or walking their dogs. A lot more than once or twice over the years, there's something going on here that people are just not aware of. I almost wonder if this thing has been stalking the woods here for who knows how long. I could be talking about a legend, but I'm pretty sure this creature is true and real, and has been around here for a very long time. Look, there's a lot more to this encounter than what I have told here. I would like to research this thing and maybe find out what it really is, if possible. My gut tells me there aren't mountain lions or coyotes that size roaming around, maybe not even wolves either. Something isn't right with the story in this creature. My speculation is this: that this creature, whatever it is something that is not from around here, period. I'm not exactly sure where it could have been. I just have a feeling that whatever this is, it is incredibly dangerous and should be avoided at all costs. I'm a Pittsburgh native and I have a story that I think you'll be interested in. So, I work at the local children's museum as an educator. I put on programs for the kids, craft demonstrations, and things like that. It's pretty fun. I spend a lot of my working hours interacting with children under the age of 10. I started noticing things because the kids were acting weird. I had a group of preschoolers for one of our hour-long workshops. I couldn't keep their attention, which happens sometimes. Not very often, but it happens. What concerned me this time was that they all kept huddling in the same corner of the room. They faced the wall and would just flail their arms around, like they were waving to someone I couldn't see. I was worried that some of the smaller kids could get hurt, so I went to break them up. When I got in that corner, I felt a chill pass through me. I assumed it was an overhead draft or something, and figured I would tell my manager later. But the thing is, I had several lessons in that exhibition area. And each time, the same thing would happen. The kids would all choose the same corner to pack into, and they'd start waving and trying to climb up the walls. Whenever I tried to move them, I felt a blast of cold come out of nowhere. It creeped me out, to be honest. And again, I work with really little kids. They're hard enough to wrangle on a good day. I finally asked one of the 6-year-olds what game they were playing. She said it wasn't a game. They just wanted to play with the lady in the corner. And this threw me off because aside from myself and my aide, there were no other adults in the room. I asked her if she could describe this lady or if she had a name. I thought it was a simple enough question. The girl said she didn't have a name and that her skin was gray. That was all she could tell me. So I played along just to get through the workshop. My aide wanted to tell our boss about it, or even the parents, but I wasn't convinced it was that bad. It's not like the kids were hurting each other or damaging anything. I honestly think I would have kept ignoring it if things had stayed that way. But then we had an incident. I was keeping my eye on one of the boys because he had gone into the corner with the other kids and was acting sort of jumpy. I thought he might have been getting overwhelmed. I was just about to pull him aside when he slid backwards across the floor. It was like someone had grabbed the back of his shirt and dragged him along. The boy was giggling, but I was terrified. An invisible hand had just pulled him clear across the room. There was no ignoring that. Plus, my aide had seen it too. He looked just as scared as I was, which made me feel better, honestly. Otherwise, I would have thought I'd gone crazy for a second. I took the boy out of the room and looked him over. He seemed fine, and it's not like I could take him to my supervisor as proof the place was haunted. So instead, I marched him over to a different activity group. I told one of the other educators that he wasn't fitting in with my group of kids, and she accepted that explanation. Easy. Which left me the task of figuring out how to corral a group of kids away from the ghost in the room. It was my aide that started to call the thing a ghost. I didn't want to think about being in the room with someone's dead spirit. The only solution I could come up with was sectioning off that corner of the room with a bunch of tables and chairs. I told the kids it was a fort and that anyone who got through the rest of the workshop without disturbing it would get a sticker. Thankfully, that was enough to get them to listen. I wish I'd thought of that earlier. Anyway, me and my aide got through the rest of the lesson without incident. We got our next batch of kids and kept the fort up. There wasn't much time for us to discuss what had happened until the end of the day. We were one of the last couple of people to finish up, and we had to do a sweep of the building. We debated whether to tell our supervisor, or if there was even a way to explain it. I figured that I had been willing to brush it off until I saw something truly strange. Why would our boss be any different? He admitted that I had a point, and it wasn't like we could close off that exhibition area. It was one of our largest rooms. When we circled back to the room and started to take down the fort, I felt that chill again. It made me more anxious than it had before. I just wanted to pack up and leave. I was scared of what would happen if the thing tried to grab me. I was trying to work as quickly as possible, and all of a sudden, I couldn't move. I was just standing there shivering, locked into a standing position. I don't know why. I tried to raise my arms or call for my aide across the room, but I couldn't. It was like someone else had locked down my body. I was frozen like that for at least a minute before I could move again. My heart rate was going crazy. I bolted to the front of the building and stayed there until my aide finished cleaning up. It was hard to come into work the next day, but I think the spirit left. The kids went back to normal. There was no more huddling. I hope the ghost stays gone. Although I am worried that it's just waiting for another dull moment, or went looking for someone else to freak out. Thanks for listening. This past winter, I went hunting, and if I knew what was going to transpire, I would have stayed home. My family owns a piece of property of about 20 acres, and we'd gone there every year since I could remember. We had a tiny cottage on the property, nothing too big, but it was all we really needed. I drove in around 5 p.m. that evening and settled into the cottage. I intended to get a good night's sleep and get up early enough to catch the morning deer walking by. I was full of excitement, so it was hard to sleep. Each time I'd look at the clock, only minutes had gone by. As restless as I was, I figured I'd get back up and make myself a cup of hot tea to calm my nerves. I put a pot of water on the stove and slid on my jacket, stepping to step outside while I waited. The air was cool, and I took a deep breath in. I love the fresh outdoor air, and I didn't get that much in the city. The sky was clear, and the full moon cast its light over the tops of the trees. The aroma and coos of nightlife only fed my eagerness. I could hear the crickets humming and a distant howling wolf. I returned inside to steep my tea, then headed back outside. Now, the once distant wolf sounded a lot closer. It was pretty common for wolves to be out and about. However, for us hunters, that meant there was a possibility they would snag a deer right out from under your nose. I didn't mind them though. After all, they needed to eat too. So I thought to myself, may the best predator win. Once I finished my tea, I headed back to bed. I woke at 3 a.m. I got ready and headed out to my deer tent that was smack dab in the middle of our property. I made myself cozy and waited in anticipation for the first wave of deer. One thing about hunting is you have to have a lot of patience, and you have to make very little movement or sound. I had been doing it for most of my life, so needless to say, I felt like a pro. Around an hour later, around 4, and the first wave of deer came. Most people would take their shot as soon as they could, but I like to watch them graze on the fields for a little. It must have been a cluster mixed of around 10 deer and doe. When hunting, it's frowned upon to shoot the mother deer if it's near the doe. Reason being the doe still needs to grow alongside its mother so that it can survive and go off on its own. That left 4 deer that were unaccompanied by a doe. I was just about to raise my gun when I heard leaves rustling. I looked and noticed something running towards the deer, and fast. I turned to face it directly, and before I knew what was happening, a wolf jolted and took a hold of a deer, making the rest of them scatter. There was a lot of commotion, and so I couldn't make anything out at first. But finally, everything settled, and then I could see something hunched over the deer. It looked like a wolf, only it had abnormally long legs. I couldn't compute what I was seeing. The wolf was huge, bigger than it should have been, and I watched as it stayed munching on the deer for a bit before dragging it off. I waited a good 15 minutes or so to make sure the coast was clear. I slung my gun over my shoulder, left the tent, and approached the area where the wolf ran up on the deer. Upon further examination, I noticed the tracks seemed off. I had been hunting all my life and could easily identify track marks from different animals. I thought it's possible it was a different breed, or maybe when all the deer scattered, their tracks and were mashed with the wolves. I was too shaken up to figure it out though, and I didn't even want to try and wait for another herd to come by, so I packed up for the day and returned to the cabin. The rest of that evening I was restless, but this night it wasn't because of excitement. It was now only 7 p.m., and I just wanted to go to sleep so that I could go out tomorrow and score. Problem was, I wasn't tired. I decided to make a fire out back for the steak and cook up some soup in the kitchen. I was going back and forth from outside to the kitchen to check on my soup. At one point, while inside, I glanced out the window at the fire and did a double take when a figure caught my eye. It watched as it prowled around the fire. This animal was too big and furry to be a common wolf. My first instinct was to grab my gun, which was in the next room. I got it and cocked it since it was already loaded. I then crept back to the window and saw the beast prop itself up on its back legs. The window was cracked just enough for the mouth of my gun to slide through, and I could get a clean shot if I needed to. The creature was distracted enough by the steak cooking that I had time to aim perfectly. And just as I was about to shoot a warning shot, the moon crept through the clouds. That made the beast turn abruptly and let out a loud howl. The howl spooked me, and my gun accidentally went off. I ducked below the window, my heart was racing, and I then slowly raised my head. I didn't see anything from my window, so I slowly cracked open the back door. Whatever it was long gone. I brought out a flashlight to check for blood, thinking I could have shot the beast, but there was no trace. I never went back to that cabin alone after that. Too much trauma for me, because whatever creature I saw that day, I'm convinced it is still out there somewhere. And I've never said this out loud before, but I'm also convinced it was a werewolf.